These next few chapters are a bit of a roller coaster. So if you remember from chapter 12, Robert and Edna are crossing, going across the bay to another island where there's a church, and they go into the church, and as soon as they sit down, Edna starts to feel unwell. She has an oppression of drowsiness that overcomes her. Another time she might have made an effort to regain her composure, but her one thought was to quit the stifling atmosphere of the church and reach the open air. So there's two things happening here. One, literally she's exhausted because she only slept maybe, 3 hours or something the night before. It said in the previous chapter that she had gone to bed a little before dawn, and she doesn't sleep very long because she's up in time to go to church. But the other thing is just the symbolism of the church. I mean, if you remember, we keep having this juxtaposition of the lovers who only see each other, and the woman in black who is always praying over her rosary beads, which indicates that, there's one part of society maybe who is progressive and thinking about only their own needs, and then there's the other part of society which is focusing on what the expectation is, and certainly being a churchgoer is one of those things. So the fact that she's willing to leave the church is symbolic again of her awakening, that she's thinking more about herself and she's ignoring the expectations of society. So she gets up and she leaves, and Robert follows her. And again, we have this reference to the lady in black, who did not notice him or reply, but kept her eyes fastened upon the pages of her velvet prayer book. So she doesn't even notice that someone has left. That's how devoted she is to the conventions of religion. So Edna says that she felt giddy and almost overcome, which is contradictory. I mean, to be sort of oppressed and drowsy and then to feel giddy and overcome. Giddy is like excited and happy and sort of overwhelmed. So maybe this is how she feels once she gets out of the church, that she has this sense of sort of energy and how you feel when you're rebelling against something. So leaving the church, I have a note here, is her second rebellion. And Robert is very devoted to her. He's like, what can I do to help you? What is going on? And then she says, it was silly. It was folly to have thought about going to church because it's not practical. She didn't sleep well. And Robert says, well, let's go to Madam Antoine's. So this is a new character. We don't know who she is, but she's a woman who they know who lives on the island. And he's anxious to continue looking at her, and he wants to take care of her. So he suggests that they go to this woman's house. So it's still and quiet. And so there's definitely a sense here when we read just the description of nature that, they are somehow isolated from the rest of the world. Edna's thinking about, how it's God's day on this drowsy island. They just sort of have it's sort of prayerful, honestly, the way this is written. So when they get to Madame Antoine's, she welcomes them with native hospitality, as she would have opened her door to let the sunlight in. That's how she greets them. There's a description of her. She's fat and she walks heavily and clumsily across the floor. She does not speak English, but when Robert made her understand that the lady who accompanied him was ill and desired to rest, she was very eager to make her feel at home. So these could be quiz questions. The whole place was very clean. And so Madame Antoine had not gone to this church service. Her son Tony had, but she supposed he would be back soon. So she invites them in, and she has prepared a midday meal, and which is what dinner is considered. I mean, in America, we tend to say dinner and supper are sort of the same thing, and lunch is more the middle of the day. But especially on a Sunday, the midday meal is often the larger meal. It's dinner, and then they would be having supper later on, which would be maybe something lighter. So there's a lovely bedroom, and Edna is sort of ushered in there and told, that she can lay down and she can rest. So she gets in the middle of this very high white bed. sort of symbolic as well. She looks around the room. She's looking at everything like it's all new to her, which of course it is. But she also looks at herself as if everything is new. So she looks at her own arms and as if she's seeing them for the first time. She observes closely as if there was something she's never noticed before, the fine, firm quality and the texture of her flesh. She clasped her hands above her head, and it was thus that she fell asleep. So this is another indication of an awakening, that she's noticing who she is physically. So it describes for quite a while here the way in which she sleeps. It's light at first, where she's sort of in and out, and she can hear Madam Antoine's walking around the floor, the chickens outside. Robert and the boy Tony are talking outside in the yard, and she hears Robert's soft, smooth French. She understood French imperfectly unless directly addressed, and the voices were only part of the other muffled sounds lulling her senses. So she finally does sleep very soundly. This is the first reference to a mosquito bar was drawn over her. It's weird to see this described as a bar. I'll see if I can find a picture of this, but mosquito nets are common in camps today. If your kids go to a camp where there's no screens on the cabin windows, during this time period, there would have been no screens on windows. And so they had mosquito netting over the bed to make sure that they didn't get bitten by mosquitoes. So she finally wakes, and she at some point has fallen deeply asleep because it is getting on towards the end of the afternoon, heading into the evening. And she sees Robert outside, and Madame Antoine is no longer in the house, but she has put out some food for Edna, and so there's bread and there's wine, and so she helps herself to some of this food, and she tears off. I just keep noticing every time there's a reference to her body, her strong white teeth are. So we see strong a lot in terms of how Edna is described physically. And then she goes outside, and when she sees Robert, an illumination broke over his whole face. And he joins, when she joins him under the orange tree. And they start flirting. You know, how many years have I slept? And he says, oh, it's been 100 years that you've been sleeping. And he adjusts the ruffle on her shoulder, like of her blouse. He says she slept 100 years. That could be a quiz question. And they sort of just tease each other. So it's very flirtation. And then, interestingly, she does finally acknowledge that she has a husband. I wonder if Leonce will be uneasy. Well, of course. She got up in the morning to go to church with Robert, and she has yet to return. And it's probably like 5 o'clock or something in the evening. I mean, it's been a while. And Robert just says, no, he won't be. He knows you're with me. So obviously, the expectation is that Leonce has no suspicions that there's a flirtation going on. Edna asks where Madame Antoine is, and he says they've gone to Vespers, which would be an evening church service, and then they're going to see friends. And he said, I'm going to take you back on Tony's boat when you're ready to go. So he's going to just borrow a boat and take her back to their island of Grand Isle. And so they have some coffee that they share, and she says, shall we go right away? And he says, well, the sun isn't as low as it will be in 2 hours. And she says the sun will be gone in 2 hours. So this is the summer. I'm thinking now, what is it, 7 o'clock at night? 6 o'clock, something like that. Let it go, who cares? So they stay there quite a while. They sit upon the ground. He lay upon the ground beside her, picking at the hem of her muslin gown. Madame Antoine finally comes back. She sits upon the bench beside the door, and they sort of remember the stories that they were discussing. And then when she and Robert stepped into Tony's boat with the red lantern, they're heading back to Grand Isle in the dark. So she has been quite the rebel here, not even just leaving church, but staying all day at the island with Robert and going home after dark. And of course, there's no cell phones. She can't contact anybody and say, hey, I'm fine, we're coming home later. No, that's not what happens. So what's been going on in the meantime is the Pontellier boys are being naughty. Just here's the names in case we don't know them already. Raoul, we've already seen his name. Etienne is the other one. Madame Ratignole has been taking care of these kids because Edna is not home. So she has stepped in to take care of these boys and has been trying to get them to go to bed. Raoul finally had gone to bed, but Etienne was not doing what he was supposed to do. He was wearing his night clothes. Which kept tripping him and everything, and he's just being difficult. It was not more than 9 o'clock. No one had yet gone to bed but the children. So they finally do go to bed. Leonce has been very uneasy at first, Madame Ratignole said, and he wanted to start out for the church. So he was concerned about her. So the note I have here is that she neglected her family. You know, she says to Robert, is it possible that Leonce is concerned? Well, what about her kids? You know, I don't think the nurse takes care of them all day and night. It seems like at some point she goes home because Madame Ratignole had to step in. So he has gone, Leonce goes to Klein's hotel to sort of hang out with his friends. And, you know, I'm sure he's drowning his uneasiness in socializing. And he says he would not be gone long. Madame Ratignole tells Edna that she is tired. She's suffering from heat and oppression. So this is what Edna comes home to. She comes home to a bit of chaos at her house. She would not consent to remain with Edna, for Monsieur Ratignole was alone, and he detested above all things to be left alone. So she's going back home to her husband and leaving Edna with her kids. Finally, Edna does get Etienne finally to stay asleep, even though he was in bed. Perhaps he wasn't sleeping. And then she goes back and she sees Robert and she says, do you know we have been together the whole day? And they tease again about, well, but 100 years you were sleeping, so maybe that's not the whole day. And so finally he leaves and Edna stays outside waiting for Leonce. She has no desire to sleep or retire, which is interesting because she had no sleep the night before. Of course, now she has slept most of the afternoon, so she's wide awake, clearly. She doesn't have any desire to go socialize, though. I mean, she could go sit with the Ratignoles. She could go to Madame Lebrun in the group that was their friends hanging out with the night before. She could go look for her husband, all kinds of things. But no. Instead, she stays by herself. She could only realize that she herself, her present self, was in some way different from the other self. So this day with Robert is another step of her awakening. That she was seeing herself different with different eyes and making the acquaintance of new conditions in herself that colored and changed her environment. So she doesn't quite understand it, but she knows things are changing. She wondered why Robert had gone away and left her. It did not occur to her to think he might have grown tired of being with her. She was not tired, and she felt that he was not. She regretted that he had gone. It was much more natural to have him stay when he was not required to leave her, so she wishes he had hung around. As Edna waited for her husband, she sang a little song that Robert was singing on the boat. She says that Robert's voice was not pretentious, probably unlike Leonce. It was musical and true, perhaps unlike Leonce. And his voice in the song was haunting her memories. I made a note here. We never find out how Leonce responds to her when he eventually gets home. This is left hanging. So, she has, and that's on purpose, of course, she has not communicated with her husband. She has been gone all day with somebody else. She's left her kids in disarray for someone else to take care of. He goes off to hang out at Klein's hotel. We never know what happens between them when he gets home. So then a few evenings later, we jump some time here. Edna has gone into the dining room And when she gets there, there's a big conversation going on that everybody's a little upset about. Victor is the predominant voice. Victor, if you remember, is Robert's younger brother. He says that Robert is going to Mexico. Everyone is very upset that Robert is going to Mexico. And Edna is shocked to hear this because Robert had been with her earlier that day, reading to her all morning. He had never mentioned going to Mexico. When Edna hears this, her face is blank, bewildered. She never even thinks to disguise her reaction. Robert sees her reaction, and looks embarrassed and uneasy. So clearly something's going on here. And she asks everyone, when is he going? And they all tell him he's going tonight, this very evening. Did you ever? And Edna says, well, that's impossible. How can a person leave Grand Isle at night and go to Mexico? And then Robert gets very defensive. He says, I said all along I was going to Mexico. He's defending himself against a swarm of stinging insects. This is a nice little simile, which is kind of how they're all acting, not just Edna, but all the other women and people who they hang out with as friends. Please let Robert explain why he is going and why he is going tonight, she calls out. Really, this table is getting to be more and more like Bedlam every day, with everybody talking at once. Sometimes I hope God will forgive me, but positively, sometimes I wish Victor would lose the power of his speech. So Madame Lebrun says this, the mother says, would everyone be quiet, Victor especially, and let's just let Robert explain what he's doing. So she comes to his defense and she wants some order. Think about this. As the mother, I'm sure she's a little embarrassed. Victor laughs and thanks his mother for her holy wish. Monsieur Farival thought that Victor should have been taken out in mid-ocean for his earliest youth and drowned. So no one really likes Victor. So there's a little bit of discussion about the fact that he's kind of like in everybody's face, it sounds like. So finally, Robert does explain. He said, there's not much to explain, but he does look at Edna as he's talking. He could only meet the gentleman whom he intended to join at Veracruz by taking such and such a steamer, which left New Orleans on such and such a day, and that Baudelaire was going out with his lugger load of vegetables that night, which gave him the chance to get to the city and make his vessel in time. So the gentleman he's talking about is the man who has kind of stepped in as a surrogate father when his real father passed away. And if you remember from earlier in the book, they were trying to find a time to see each other. Well, it turns out this man is going to be in Mexico, and so he sees this opportunity. Robert's going to go see him. So Monsieur Farival is like, well, when did you decide all this? And Robert says, this afternoon. What time this afternoon? At 4 o'clock, Robert says. So very last minute, apparently. So Edna is picking at her court bouillon with her fork. This is like a seafood stew. We have the lovers and the lady in black again. Just, again, the juxtaposition of these two showing like the freedom and the restrictions of society. She actually asks Robert, the lady in black, if she could get some prayer beads from Mexico if he goes there. That's how, religious she is. Everyone gives Robert some advice, like be really careful in Mexico, they tell him. Victor becomes hilarious and was attempting to tell an anecdote about a Mexican girl who served chocolate one winter in a restaurant in Dauphine Street. No one would listen to him, but old Monsieur Farival, who went into convulsions over the droll story. So they're kind of making some racist comments here, being sort of silly about this whole thing. And Edna is just watching all of this and wondering if they've all gone crazy. So then she looks at Robert and she says, and what time do you plan to leave? And he says 10 o'clock. And she says, are you ready to go? Quite ready. So then he turned to answer some questions put to him by his mother, and Edna, having finished her black coffee, left the table. So Edna gets up and leaves. She's clearly pissed, right? She goes to her room. The cottage was close and stuffy after leaving the outer air. She did not mind. There appeared to be 100 different things demanding her attention indoors. So this description here is Edna starting to fuss, picking things up, helping organize the kids' clothes. I mean, she's definitely stressed. So the kids are playful. They're inclined to talk. She sends the nurse away, and she actually does something nice for her kids. So this is a nice contrast to the fact that she neglected them when she was hanging out at the island with Robert. She tells her kids a story. She literally makes it up as she goes along. So let's not anyone say she's not a good mother. She can apply herself, and she does. She's a unique mother. She doesn't do exactly what all the other mothers do, but she knows they need something from her, and so she tells them a story. Instead of soothing, it excited them and added to their wakefulness. She left them in heated arguments, speculating about the conclusion of the tale that their mother promised to finish the following night. So she doesn't even make them go to sleep. She tells them the story, she lets them talk about it, and she leaves the room and says that she'll tell them more the next day. The little black girl came in to say that Madame Lebrun would like to have Mrs. Pontellier go and sit with them over at the house until Robert goes away. And Edna says no. She's already ready for bed, and she doesn't want to go over there, which makes sense. I don't think she wants to see Robert leave. She's annoyed with him. She thinks about it for a minute. She starts to get dressed, and then she changes her mind, and she's like, no, I'm not going. So clearly, she's conflicted. It says here, too, she was overheated and irritable. She fans herself energetically for a while. Madame Ratignole comes down to discover what was the matter. All that noise and confusion at the table must have upset me, replied Edna. I hate shocks and surprises. So she's clearly rattled by all of this, but she's not going to go and attend to Robert. And she just complains. She kind of gives a rant here to Madame Ratignole. All morning I was with him. He said nothing about this. And Madame Ratignole agrees. Yes, I think it was showing us all, you especially, very little consideration. So she recognizes they have a special friendship. So later on, Robert comes to her house, and he asks Edna, aren't you feeling well? And she says, oh, I'm fine. Are you going right away? And he lights a match. He looks at his watch. He says in 20 minutes he's going to go. So he definitely is feeling guilty for not having communicated with her. And so Edna says for him to get a chair. Now he's playing games. He's like, no, this is fine. He stays standing. She offers him the fan because it's hot. And he says, oh, no, thank you. It does no good. You have to stop fanning sometime and feel all the more uncomfortable afterward. Like when you cool yourself off, then you feel worse when you stop being cooled off. And she says, well, that's a ridiculous thing that men say. I have never known anyone to say anything bad about fanning. And then she says, well, how long will it be? And he's like, I don't know. This seems to me perfectly preposterous and uncalled for. I don't like it. I don't understand your motive for silence and mystery, never saying a word to me about it this morning. So she kind of tells him off, I don't know. You're going away. You didn't say anything about it. You're not even telling me now how long you'll be gone. He is silent, not offering to defend himself. So finally he does say, don't part from me in ill humor. I never knew you to be out of patience with me before. So he's like, don't be mad at me. And she says, well, I don't want to part at any ill humor, but can't you understand? I've grown used to seeing you. Your action seems unfriendly. So she's like, I like you, and this isn't nice of you. You don't even offer an excuse. Why, I was planning to be together, thinking of how pleasant it would be to see you in the city next winter. So she's giving him quite the hint here. I thought this was going to be more than a summer thing, that we would see each other in the city when we go back in the winter. And then, so was I, he blurted. Perhaps that's the... And then he stops. Okay, so We can complete this sentence. Perhaps that's the problem. He realizes he's crossed a line. Remember, he said earlier that he would never marry or, chase after someone else's wife or steal someone else's wife. Yet he flirts with these women. And so the day on the island crossed the line, and he realizes he has gone too far and that he's not being a gentleman if he continues to pursue her. So she's like, please write to me. And he says he will, and then he says goodbye. How unlike Robert. The merest acquaintance would have said something more empathetic than that. I will thank you goodbye to such a request. So he'd already taken leave of the people at the house. He descended the steps to go to the boat. They walked away in the darkness. She could only hear Beaudelet's voice. Robert was apparently had not even spoken a word to his companion. So he's silent, he's cranky, and Edna is very upset. Edna bites her handkerchief. Her eyes are brimming with tears. So she recognizes for the first time the symptoms of infatuation, which she had felt incipiently as a child, as a girl in her earliest teens, and later as a young woman. So remember, earlier on, we found out that when she was younger, she had very passionate crushes on people that were unattainable. And then she married Leonce because he was the right kind of guy, but it wasn't like she had that feeling for him. Well, she has these same kind of feelings for Robert. The past was nothing to her, offered no lesson which she was willing to heed. The future was a mystery which she never attempted to penetrate. The present alone was significant, was hers, to torture her as it was doing then, with the biting conviction that she had lost that which she had held, that she had been denied that which she impassioned, newly awakened, being demanded. So this is interesting, and I do kind of feel like it's a little lame. Now, I have to be careful because in our day and age, like, freedom doesn't mean a new man or a new woman. It means yourself. This is a different time period. But this flirtation with Robert was more meaningful to her than her relationship with her husband. And now she has lost it, and she is devastated. And yet so much of her awakening has been only about herself. So this is something that we do see in this literature from this time period, that as women are searching for meaning, it often lands on another man. And yet the whole sort of movement towards modernism is that women don't need men, that they can be on their own. Remember, though, that Edna is experiencing these feelings before modernism. This is just at the turn of the century, so the Victorian era is coming to an end through Edna, but it has not become yet the modernist period where women can just be their own person. So she definitely is having this awakening revolve also around Robert, not just herself.